When you're out looking for fossils, typically what you'll find are fossils that are composed of hard parts, or what we call biominerals. Biominerals are a selection of minerals that living organisms incorporate within their bodies. And this process is known as biomineralization. Today, we're going to go over four different biominerals that living organisms incorporate within their exoskeletons to create hard parts. The first mineral is calcium carbonate, or calcite, for example. Calcite is a very common mineral that organisms use, specifically within the oceans, in order for them to build their hard parts. One of these organisms are brachiopods, or rechinellate brachiopods, like these. So this is a slab of limestone that has all these different shells in it, and these are all examples of brachiopods. And brachiopods have a shell typically composed of calcium carbonate, or calcite. Another example here is a beautiful example of a paraspirifer brachiopod from the Devonian rocks of Ohio. This entire shell is composed of calcium carbonate, or calcite, for example. The plates of echinoderms, like crinoids and sea urchins like these, have their plates composed of calcite as well. Their spines are also composed of calcite. And then this is a beautiful crinoid as well, from the Mississippian period, or the Mississippian rocks of Indiana. And on the screen is an example of a beautiful Cretaceous sea urchin that you can see the individual plating that is inside. And here is a beautiful example of what these minerals look like, or what this calcite looks like. There are some sponges that also create calcium carbonate based skeletons, and some of these sponges include things like the extinct archaeocyathids. Some other organisms that also have a calcium carbonate based skeleton are things like trilobites and other arthropods. When you're looking at an arthropod and you may be crushing it, for example, it has that crushing sound to it, that crunch sound. And that is because the bodies of arthropods are composed of calcium carbonate intermingled with chitin. And trilobites took that to a whole different advantage. So they secreted calcium carbonate based exoskeletons in order to create very hard bodies. So this is an example of a beautiful trilobite fossil, and it is all composed of calcite. Even the eyes of trilobites are composed of individual lenses of calcite as well. And so calcite has some pretty interesting optical properties. We call this biorefringence. And this is when a single ray of polarized light enters the calcite crystal and creates a double image, and we call that double refraction. So what you see on the screen here is an image of a calcite, a crystal or Iceland spar, that you can actually see double lines, or the double images. And this is because the light has been refracted within the calcite crystal. And this is likely what trilobites would have seen swimming along the ocean floor from 500 million years ago to around 252 million years ago when they went extinct. Another form of calcium carbonate is what we call aragonite. Aragonite is an example of a mineral that we call a polymorph. And polymorph minerals are minerals that have the same chemical composition, but have a different crystal structure. And calcite and aragonite are a really good example of those polymorph minerals. Typically, what you'll find, or the organisms that make up these aragonite skeletons, are things like mollusks, things like bivalves and gastropods. So what you'll typically find on the beach is the shell. You may look at the shell and you wonder what it's composed of. Well, these shells are composed of aragonite. So the shells that you find on the beach are also composed of aragonite. Here is a fossil oyster shell, this inoceramate from the Cretaceous rocks of Colorado, and you can see there's this pearly shine to it. And this is the reason why it's also composed of calcium carbonate. Things like cephalopod shells, like this beautiful nautilus shell. You can see it has this really pretty pearly, we call this the mother of pearl. And this is because it is composed of aragonite as well. Now, calcite can turn into aragonite, and you can get that vice versa. So you can have calcite turning into aragonite. Aragonite is basically the unstable form of calcite. And so you can get things that have a aragonitic skeleton being replaced by calcite, or you can get a calcite organ, or you can get an organism that has a calcite uh, body being replaced by aragonite. So that does happen from time to time, based on the different environmental conditions. Here is an extinct ammonite fossil that you can see, and then these little patchy marks here, these little patches here, are the original shell that made up the ammonite around about 80 million years ago. And so we call this nacre. And when you strip off the nacre or the original shell, you will get these suture patterns underneath the nacre. And so if you see the suture patterns underneath the ammonite, this lets you know that the original nacre or the original shell is now gone. So the shell is missing, but on this particular side, you can see the nacre or the aragonitic shell still being preserved. And then corals, for example, are also composed, at least from modern corals, are also composed of aragonite. So this is a fossil coral. This is the scleractinian coral, but they're also composed of aragonite as well. There are also skeletons of corals that are composed, or at least in the past, are composed of calcite, like this Devonian horn coral. This extinct horn coral from New York is composed of calcite. And you do get some forms of corals that can be a mixture of both, of calcite and aragonite. As I talked about before, you can get replacement in some special environmental conditions. The next biomineral is silicon dioxide, or quartz, for example. And this is a beautiful quartz crystal. Quartz is a very common mineral. It's one of the most common minerals on Earth's crust. And there's not that many living organisms that have a body composed of silicon dioxide. But examples of organisms include things like sponges. We have things called hexanellate sponges, or glass sponges. Their uh, their body are composed of things what we call spicules, and these spicules are composed of silicon dioxide or quartz. And so glass sponge comes from the name, which means that their body is typically composed of glass, which is silicon dioxide or quartz. Diatoms are an example of microorganisms that also have a body composed of quartz or silicon dioxide. Sometimes you can get replacement. So things that have a calcium carbonate based skeleton can be replaced by silicon dioxide, based on the certain conditions. So I do have an example of some silicified, or what we call silicified fossils. So this here is a coral fossil, but as you can see, it has been completely replaced by quartz. So this was once an aragonitic skeleton, and over time, after the coral died, silica has replaced the skeleton of this coral. So now it is a silicified coral fossil, instead of being composed by aragonite or calcium carbonate. Here is also another fossil coral. This has been also being replaced by quartz as well. This is a Carboniferous age coral. And then here you have a crinoid stem. So crinoids like this have bodies composed of plates of calcium carbonate. Well, within this particular specimen, I have a better example of the same specimen on the screen that I'll put up. But this particular crinoid fossil has also been replaced by quartz, or by silicon dioxide. So as you can see here, it has this blue texture to it. And this blue texture, this blue makeup, is quartz. And so this organism that had an original calcium carbonate based skeleton, likely composed of calcite, has now been replaced by quartz over time. The last biomineral that we'll talk about is apatite. And apatite is a particular mineral that is typical, that your teeth and your bones are composed out of. We call this hydroxyapatite. And this can include your, again, teeth, like this megalodon tooth, for example. This Carcharicles megalodon is composed of calcium phosphate or apatite, for example. Bones are also composed of this biomineral as well. This is a dinosaur bone from the Hell Creek Formation. This dates back to the late Cretaceous. And this is also composed of calcium phosphate or apatite. There is one other group of brachiopods that we call the lingulate brachiopods that also have a calcium phosphate shell or a calcium phosphate based shell. Um, Lingulate brachiopods typically aren't well preserved within the fossil record. The organisms, or at least the brachiopods, like the rechinellate brachiopods that have a calcite based exoskeleton, are the ones that are preserved the best within the fossil record because the calcite is a lot more stable. The calcium phosphate that we have, or the apatite that makes up the lingulate brachiopods, aren't as well preserved, and what you'll typically see is the aragonite not being preserved. This can also be the same for the aragonite based living organisms. Typically, when you're finding a bivalve or anything composed of calcium carbonate, like aragonite, for example, typically what you'll find is that material gets eroded away or gets dissolved away. And typically, what you'll see in things like clams or in gastropods are steinkerns, which is when the shell has dissolved away, and what you get is an internal structure of that fossil. So you're not getting a covering of the original shell, but instead you are getting the internal structure of that particular organism. So the shell has completely dissolved away, and what you're going to get is an internal cast. And so that is an example of what we call biominerals. Biominerals are very, very important. Again, they make up us. They make up all vertebrate life, and they make up lots and lots of invertebrate life as well. These are the types of minerals that you'll typically find in fossils. So it's one of the big reasons why fossils have hard parts, or when we do find fossils, they're all composed of hard parts. Soft bodied organisms aren't normally preserved within the fossil record, though there are definitely exceptions where they definitely are. But what you'll typically see are fossils or organisms that have hard parts, and those hard parts make it within the fossil record rather than the organisms that do not have the hard parts. So when you're looking at fossils or you're looking at living organisms today, what you typically will see are biomineralized parts. That is parts that are composed of biominerals like calcite, aragonite, quartz, and apatite. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something and got something about how biominerals are the important components of life in ancient life. And I will see you later on another video. This is Paleo 101.